Good morning, everyone. How are we feeling? Good. All right. I want to say thank you so much to you, Thomas. This is such an honor to be here. And thank you, Anthony Traska, for allowing us to be your parking today in your beautiful space here. This is a great way to start the morning. And I'm really looking forward to having a conversation with you about some very interesting things, some challenging things. I'm going to take this talk and go in a couple places with it. It's called Trans Equality in Cleveland and Ohio, Relationships and Vulnerability in the, quote, legal fight for, struggle for equality. I want to take a frame where we talk first about grounding what it means to be transgender, and then I want to talk a little bit about the legal reality, and then I want to talk about bathrooms. It's not something you usually get to say. I want to talk about bathrooms, but I want us to have that conversation because that conversation is happening everywhere and has been happening in Cleveland for quite some time. Let's start with some baselines. Gender. Gender is in our minds. And we also have bodies that are assigned a gender at our birth by other people. And that part is key. When those two don't align, a person is transgender. When they do, a person is cisgender. For how many folks in the space here, is that a new term? Cisgender. Okay? So let's also get some things out of the way, some questions that the transgender community get a lot. Some transgender people choose to have surgery. Some transgender people choose to be on hormone therapy. Some transgender people choose to do nothing, or they choose to express themselves as the gender they know themselves to be. And the last part isn't coming, but it's really important. It's none of our damn business. So, to be clear, I also want to make sure we understand what we're talking about. This has nothing to do with whom a person loves, right? Gender identity is when I close my eyes and I look inside and say, what gender am I? Who am I? All of us have a gender identity. When we open our eyes, we also all have a sexual orientation. It's when we look out at the world and say, whom do I love? Who do I want to spend my time with? And so transgender people can be all sexual orientations. Some are straight, some are gay, some are lesbian, some are bi, some are pan. These are two different concepts. The problem is, the law will penalize you for both, your sexual orientation and your gender identity, because it is generally legal in Ohio to fire you, to deny you housing, to refuse to serve you in a public space because of who you are as a person or whom you love. Is that shocking to some folks? Yep, I said that. Marriage equality happened, right? Do we all know that? We finally have the right to marry the person that we love in our society. In 2015, Jim Obergefell, a courageous man, married his husband after a 20-year relationship. They had to fly to Maryland because they couldn't get married here in Ohio. But they came back. They came back and said, we're married now. He was suffering with terminal illness, was going to die within weeks. But they were married and they were happy. And then they learned that Ohio was not going to recognize that marriage. And in those last months of John Arthur's life, they bravely fought. And they brought that case all the way up to the Supreme Court. And the Supreme Court said, you have the right to marry the person that you love. And when that happened, people married the people that they love. And people celebrated at the hope that this brought. And many other people got confused. And they said, oh, the LGBTQ community has full equality. We're done. We've achieved everything. And although marriage equality brought great, great strides, many legal rights and responsibilities, it is not the end of the fight in any means. It is one legal achievement. Lived equality is a whole other reality. And legal inequality in Ohio, we still do not have basic protections in housing, employment, and in public accommodations. And there is a cognitive dissonance. Do you feel that? Do you feel that tension? How can you marry the person that you love, but then be fired for so doing? That's the lived reality here in Ohio. That's what we face. And that is what Equality Ohio is trying to change. It's 2017 and that's still the state of the law. How many people here had heard of Equality Ohio before today? I love it. I love when people have heard of this. We are the statewide LGBTQ education and advocacy organization working to change hearts, minds, and laws. We've been around since 2005, and we've been fighting for these basic non-discrimination protections since day one. Marriage equality just happened to come first. It just doesn't mean that it's the end of the struggle. So that's the legal landscape, right? People can marry the person they love, but we're also finding people don't because they're afraid that they're going to get fired for so doing. And that happens all across the state. But now I want to drill down really specific. I want to talk about toilets. I want to talk about bathrooms. So you don't have to answer out loud, but when you look at this, does this make you anxious? Does the thought of a restroom give you pause? Do you have to contemplate how you are going to go about your day using a restroom? If the answer is no, you have a privilege. Because many transgender individuals have great anxiety around restrooms. And this is a conversation that we are having nationally. And it's the question I want to pose. What is the solution to this group today? It's hard to see in the light on this slide. But this is a transgender woman contemplating her options around restrooms. She is staring at two options. If she uses the restroom for women, the gender she identifies with, she risks getting yelled at by someone who doesn't assess her gender to be what she knows it is. If she uses the restroom for men, which might have been the gender she was assigned at birth, she risks her safety. She risks being actually assaulted. That is the lived reality here in Ohio. So what are some solutions? I want to think creatively about some solutions. This is an architectural solution. I hope you can see it in this light. Today's restrooms should be multiple, gender-neutral, single-occupancy bathrooms where sinks are shared in a common area. This is something proposed by Matt Nardella of Moss Design Studio in Chicago. This is an architectural solution. How many folks have seen some progressive, gender-inclusive spaces? Yeah, I've seen these. Excellent, excellent. So I'm seeing that this is a direction we are moving as a society. Other countries very much have these spaces already, right? What is the solution that others are proposing right now? What is the fear-based solution that we are talking about? Sadly, it is a solution of, not a solution at all. It is demonizing transgender individuals and trying to paint them as scary predators, to increase fear and have laws regulating restroom spaces. We saw this in Houston. Does people know about Houston? Yep. We saw this in North Carolina. What happened in Houston was a basic non-discrimination ordinance, an ordinance that was built to protect people in housing, employment, and public accommodations, was drilled down to a singular transphobic, hateful argument that somehow this law built to protect people would allow predators into restroom spaces to prey on women and girls. It is a misnomer. And the messaging around it was scary. It was really scary. It was put to scary music. It tried to show that somehow cisgender men were going to chase small girls into restroom spaces to abuse them. Let's deconstruct that myth right here, right? It's illegal to harm a person in any space, including in a restroom. That doesn't change in the face of a non-discrimination ordinance, right? Transgender people are in fact the individuals most vulnerable if they are put in a restroom space that doesn't match their gender identity. They are the most likely to face assault. The hard thing is this messaging worked. If you ask people, should non-discrimination protections exist for LGBTQ people? Most people say yes. First of all, most people believe those protections exist right now. That's the hardest thing that we struggle is to say, no, this is not the law. But once you ask them, they say, oh yeah, that should change. What we have learned in studying this is that when you layer on scary, untrue, transphobic messaging, it scares people and that support tanks. And you can build it up You can change people's minds, but it takes work. So now we come to our solution. What is our solution? Hearts, minds. Change them. It is tough. And what I want to focus the next part of our conversation is how Equality Ohio is trying to do this, how our amazing mighty team of 7 is working around the state, how our incredible group of volunteers are working to change hearts and minds, and how this might inspire you in changing hearts and minds for this issue or for whatever issue you are working on right now. So I want to tell you a story. Ohio almost faced a bathroom bill like North Carolina did. In North Carolina, legislators came together on a special day, paid $52,000 just to bring folks together on one day to pass a hateful law that told transgender people they could only use the restroom matching the gender assigned on their birth certificate. So not what they know themselves to be, not by their gender identity. And the business community responded. We remember this. They pulled out. They said, no, we don't believe in this at all. That bill almost was introduced in Ohio. The person on the slide is Representative John Becker. He's a very conservative person from the southern part of the state. And our work is about relationship, right? So we wanted to sit down with him. We wanted a meeting with him. But it took some trust, too. We're a nonpartisan organization, and we have relationship with conservative folks at the state. And they spoke with Representative Becker, and they said, Representative, please sit down with Equality Ohio. We promise there will be a safe conversation. And we did. And he took the meeting. And so we sat down with the representative with 7 transgender individuals from across Ohio who were bravely willing to come in that room and sit with the representative and answer his questions and just engage in dialogue. And when he entered the room, he was very stiff and he said, I don't want to hurt people, I want to stop this bathroom free-for-all. And that's exactly what we did. We took a breath. We said, let's introduce ourselves. And so we sat around the table and we just talked. And individuals shared who they are. And they shared their story. And they shared anecdotes from their daily life. And suddenly, some questions emerged. And the representative got engaged. And he messed up. He messed up in people's pronouns. And he was corrected. And you know what? He self-corrected. And then he asked questions to enhance his understanding and say, oh, I didn't think it was like that. I didn't know you feared restroom spaces. I didn't know you felt vulnerable. And he went around the table and he talked to transgender women, transgender men, parents of transgender children, advocates, allies. That meeting was supposed to last an hour. 2.5 hours later, we were still talking. It gives me chills now. At the end of the meeting, he turned to us and said, my God, I had no idea I was more your ally than not. And you know what, folks? He never introduced a bathroom bill here in Ohio. And more importantly, when he knows someday that he has a transgender grandchild, he will have the tools, at least the start of the tools, of how to understand them, how to connect with them, and how to support them. That's the power of being willing to talk, be vulnerable, and build relationship. So we've talked about the state of Ohio. I want to drill down a little bit further. This is the skyline we all know and love, right? Our own Cleveland. Cleveland had to deal with this issue too. How many people remember this? And one person in the audience, one of our amazing advocates who stood with us in testimony. But here's what happened in Cleveland. Cleveland passed local non-discrimination protections. There are 18 cities in Ohio that have local non-discrimination protections. So no protections at the state level, but if you live in Cleveland or Akron or Columbus or Cincinnati or Athens or Oxford or a handful of other cities, you do have some protections at the local level. Cleveland was an early adopter. And in 2009, they passed a non-discrimination code to protect sexual orientation and gender identity in all areas where classes are protected. But back then they did it with some fear. They actually made an exception. Much like North Carolina, they said, it's not okay to discriminate against LGBTQ people, except it's okay to tell a transgender person what restroom they can or cannot use. It should never have been codified, but it was. And so we worked with a coalition of partners, other wonderful organizations, the ACLU, HRC, the local LGBTQ Center, PFLAG. We all came together, and hundreds of volunteers over the course of what took 3 years had one-on-one conversations all across the city to talk about bathrooms and to talk about them before the nation was actually talking about them, to dispel those myths, to answer people's questions that no, this doesn't actually change a person's safety, except that it makes transgender people more safe. We talked with our wonderful council members like Councilmember Brancatelli, who's here today, and we're in his space. Thank you for supporting this measure. And it took 3 years. And believe me, I don't know if you can see this in the light, we came down onto Cleveland with a vengeance. The toilets attacked the city. But all of those one-on-one conversations, the town halls, the sitting with businesses, the getting businesses to stand up to say, this is good for our community, ultimately worked. And a year ago this week, days before the Republican National Convention came into town, this council not just passed, but passed unanimously a law to remove this harmful exception from Cleveland's code. And it became law just a week later. So what do we take away from this? This is a glimpse into the work that Equality Ohio does. We've talked about the legal inequalities in Ohio, right? No basic protections for lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender people, queer people. We've talked about some of the achievements we've made, adding those protections at the city level. There's still lived equality, and that requires cultural change of hearts and minds so that we accept our LGBTQ community, even if those protections are in place. What are some of the takeaways that I can share of how to do that work effectively, and perhaps how to do whatever work is stirring your heart right now more effectively? And so I would start with reject cynicism. It's pretty easy to be cynical. In fact, it's pretty easy to be cynical right now in this very challenging space at our national level, right? It's easy to wall ourselves in with those who agree with us instead of having some of the hard conversations to maybe connect with someone who doesn't yet. So I say, reject cynicism. Work in good faith and be honest. Share your agenda with the person you're talking with. Don't hide it. Just lay it out. I want to have a conversation about LGBTQ equality with you. I'm guessing we might not agree on some of those pieces, but can I come with my full self to just be honest with you and talk to you about it? And then the part I didn't put up here, but is equally important, listen honestly. Don't be focusing on what you're going to say next. Listen to the person across from you. Probably the most important thing I've been learning in this work through Equality Ohio is if you are willing to be vulnerable, guess what? The person across from you may be too. We created a safe space for Representative John Becker to have a conversation. We were vulnerable. Those brave individuals, the transgender individuals who shared their stories were vulnerable, and it took the guard down. And he was able to actually be vulnerable too and ask questions that changed his heart and understanding. Now, he's not championing a non-discrimination bill for us yet, but he's also not in our way right now, right? That is the power of creating a space of honest vulnerability to have a real conversation. Assume support. I am big on not asking for permission. And sometimes I have to ask for forgiveness. But I've also found that if you go into a situation and you assume support, sometimes you actually pull the very best out of the person across from you, despite their best efforts to not show their best. Go into something assuming you're going to get support, and sometimes you get it right out of hand. But also accept that you will fail. We failed yesterday. Anybody here on our list? Anybody on our Equality Ohio listserv? All right, by the end of this, I hope you all will join, please, because you get updates like this. We had a 48-hour window where we learned that there was a judicial confirmation happening in the Sixth Circuit, which is our appellate circuit. It's a very important circuit deciding cases. It's the case where the Obergefell v. Hodges decision was heard, right? We need fair-minded judges, and the person who is proposed for this, John K. Bush, is not a fair-minded individual. He is homophobic, he is racist, he is overtly fighting everything that we are fighting for. And we only had 48 hours, but we heard that there was a chance. Maybe we could flip 2 votes at the federal level, including our own Senator Rob Portman. Maybe we could convince him that this is not a judge with good judgment. He doesn't have good judgment. He can't be a judge. And so we tried. And we mobilized all of you on our list, and you called, and you said, please don't confirm this individual. And then yesterday at 12:15, the vote happened, and we were still 2 votes short. So, we gave it our all. We put together a robust social media campaign in just a couple hours, and all of you engaged those phone lines and lit them up and tried to hold your legislators accountable. And it still didn't work. But you also have to remember, you miss 100% of the shots you don't take. And that's something our team lives by. We also have to recognize, as advocates, when heart isn't enough. Sometimes your best, most loving efforts just aren't working. Don't give up, just reframe your arguments, right? One of the ways that we do this work is by trying to change hearts and minds and trying to meet people where they are at the angle that will best work for them. There is a coalition called Ohio Business Competes that is part of our work. It is a business coalition, a statement of values where 136, and every day we're adding more, businesses have come together to say, you know what? Not protecting LGBTQ people is actually bad for business. I want to attract the best and the brightest talent. I want you to come to our state. I'm trying to attract great employees. How can I do that if my company policies protect you, but the state policies don't? Folks, we are losing millennials to other states that are more progressive in this area because they don't want to set their roots here. That is millennials as a whole, whether or not they identify as LGBTQ personally. And so we have this coalition of businesses who are saying, yeah, state, by not having these protections, you are actually hurting us and our economy. You are not actually open for business if you're not open for all talent. So this coalition is part of our work. We try to change hearts and minds because we believe people should accept LGBTQ people as they are, period, no questions asked. And this argument helps those who perhaps are not quite accepting of the LGBTQ community themselves yet. But they get business, and they want good business for their communities back home. And so don't get discouraged if one argument that you're trying isn't working. Pivot and try another. See where you can connect with the person across from you, because that's one step further on the journey, the ultimate journey to full lived equality for LGBTQ people. Additionally, it's our duty, it's our job to create space for people to be their best selves. And sometimes this is even in spite of themselves. We're a nonpartisan organization. We work across all party lines. Do you know how many conservative people there are in our state house who in hushed voices tell me, I'm with you? In creating that space for them to be able to say that, so that perhaps they will be able to say that through a vote of support, or perhaps they will be able to champion a bill more publicly at a later time. That is how we move everybody forward on the issues that are so important to our society and to what we believe in. Create that space where they can be their best self, even if they are afraid to be their best self right now. Take advantage of the opportunities that are presented, even if you're tired. I'm guessing a lot of us are exhausted right now. We've been working pretty hard on a lot of fronts, right? Our team checked in at the end of March, and we looked at each other and we're like, we are tired. Why are we so tired? And our comms director ran some data, and he's like, folks, we just helped 3 cities pass a ban on conversion therapy, a fully inclusive non-discrimination law, and another fully inclusive non-discrimination law within a span of 3 days. And there's weeks of work that lead up to that. There are years where we have passed 2 in an entire year. We did 3 in 3 days. But that's the exciting time that we have right now. We have momentum. We have people who, especially at the local level, want to make change. So if you see an opportunity, don't be afraid to take it, even if you're tired. But also remember to engage in some self-care at this time. We all have to be able to work for tomorrow. And finally, relationship is everything. Keep at it. Relationship is messy. It is hard. But when you have it, it is when people can actually ask you honest questions. It's why individuals who are on a journey to accepting full LGBTQ equality can call folks on our team, can call our volunteers, and ask questions that maybe they wouldn't ask publicly, but they feel safe in relationship to ask us to help them in their own understanding. We don't criticize for folks for asking questions. We welcome them. Be a person that welcomes a person where they are in the journey, exactly where they are, to help them move forward. But the work continues, and we would really love your help in working for full legal and lived equality here in Ohio. Thank you.